6:30 in the morning. A 911 call. A child not breathing. What police found in that Greenwich Village apartment would expose one of the most devastating failures in American child protection history. Before this story ends, you'll understand why every warning sign was ignored, every cry for help dismissed, and how a 6-year-old girl lost her life while dozens of people watched it happen. This is the Lisa Steinberg case, a tragedy that changed child protection laws across America forever. I'm your host, and today we're examining a case that still haunts everyone who lived through it. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. For longtime viewers, make sure you're still subscribed. YouTube has been changing settings automatically. Your support helps us continue telling these important stories. Before we continue, I need to give you a content warning. This case involves serious harm to a child. The details are difficult, disturbing, and heartbreaking. If you need to step away at any point, please do. This is a heavy one. Take care of yourself. Let me give you the key facts up front. The victim was Lisa Steinberg, a 6-year-old girl. The assault happened on November 1, 1987 in Greenwich Village, Manhattan, New York. Lisa died on November 5, 1987. The case was solved when Joel Steinberg was convicted on January 30, 1989, approximately 1 year and 3 months after Lisa's death. Now, let me tell you how this tragedy unfolded. November 2, 1987, Manhattan's Greenwich Village, 14 West 10th Street. When Officer James Boyd arrived at the apartment that morning, what he found didn't match the emergency call. The dispatcher had been told a child had gotten sick from eating vegetables, but this wasn't a child who'd gotten sick from food. This was something far, far worse. The apartment was dark, filthy beyond description, refuse scattered everywhere, no working lights. The smell was overwhelming, the kind that hits you in the face and makes you gag. And in the middle of all this chaos, all this neglect, lay a 6-year-old girl. 43 pounds, barely breathing, her small body covered in injuries at different stages of healing, fresh wounds layered over old ones, marks everywhere, on her arms, her legs, her torso, her face. Her feet had multiple layers of dirt caked on them. A 2-inch section of hair was missing from her head, torn out at the roots. The medical examiner would later testify there was hardly an inch of her body that wasn't marked by trauma. But that wasn't all Officer Boyd found that morning. In a makeshift enclosure in the corner of the room, tied with rope around his waist like an animal, sat a 16-month-old boy. They called him Mitchell. He was covered in filth, sitting in a soiled diaper, drinking spoiled milk from a bottle. The rope kept him tethered to the bars, preventing him from moving more than a few feet in any direction. 2 children, 1 apartment in one of Manhattan's most expensive neighborhoods, and 2 adults who would soon be arrested. Joel Steinberg, 46 years old, a criminal defense attorney who'd claimed to handle hundreds of adoptions over the years. When Detective Irma Rivera arrived at the scene and asked why he wasn't at the hospital with his critically injured daughter, his response shocked everyone present. "I need to take a shower, I need to get my coffee." Not, "Is she okay?" Not, "Will she survive?" Not, "Please help her." He needed his shower, he needed his coffee. His morning routine was more important than his daughter's life. And then there was Hedda Nussbaum, 45 years old, a senior editor at Random House Publishing, one of the most prestigious positions in the publishing world. When she emerged from the back of the apartment, everyone in that room had the same visceral reaction. Her face showed signs of severe, repeated trauma. Her nose had been broken multiple times. You could see it had never healed properly. She had injuries in various stages of healing covering her face and body, infected wounds that clearly hadn't received medical attention, cuts covering her scalp, hair thinning and graying, barely covering the damage underneath. One detective would later describe her as looking like she'd endured years of systematic torture. This wasn't a family. This was a house of horrors hiding in plain sight in one of America's most affluent neighborhoods. The little girl, Lisa, they learned her name was rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital in Manhattan. Doctors found a subdural hematoma, bleeding in the brain, the kind of injury typically seen from high-speed car accidents or falls from three-story windows. Except this child hadn't been in a car accident. She hadn't fallen from a building. Someone had struck her with tremendous deliberate force and then left her on a bathroom floor for 12 hours while they engaged in drug use and did nothing to help her. But this story doesn't begin in November of 1987. It begins 6 years earlier, in the spring of 1981, with a scared teenager who thought she was doing the right thing. Michelle Lounders was 19 years old, young, frightened, pregnant. The father was a 20-year-old college student who couldn't provide financial support. Michelle looked at her situation realistically and made what she thought was the most responsible decision: adoption. She wanted her baby to have a good life, the kind of life she couldn't provide at 19, a stable home, 2 parents, financial security, educational opportunities, everything a child deserves. Her mother was supportive of the decision. They both believed this was an act of love, not abandonment. They were doing what was best for the baby. Michelle had visited an OB/GYN office once before when accompanying a friend. The doctor was Michael Bergman. When she discovered her pregnancy, that's who she called. Dr. Bergman confirmed the pregnancy and scheduled her first appointment, and then he made another call to a lawyer he knew, someone who handled adoptions. Lots of them. 300 adoptions, the lawyer would claim when they met. His name was Joel Steinberg. On April 18, 1981, Michelle and her mother met with Steinberg at a restaurant in Greenwich Village. He painted a picture of the perfect adoptive family, a professional couple with successful careers. The father was an attorney, just like him, mature, established, financially secure. The baby would grow up in Manhattan, surrounded by culture and opportunity. Everything would be perfect. All Michelle had to do was pay $500 in cash. No checks, no paper trail, just cash. Looking back now, that should have been a massive red flag, but Michelle was 19 years old. She was scared. She was vulnerable. She trusted the doctor who'd referred her. She trusted the lawyer sitting across from her in his expensive suit, speaking confidently about his experience with adoptions. She believed them when they said this was standard procedure. Baby Lisa was born on May 14, 1981, at Beekman Downtown Hospital in Lower Manhattan. Michelle had one specific request. She wanted a Roman Catholic family. She wanted to make sure her daughter was raised with faith and values. Steinberg assured her the adoptive family met all her requirements. He promised her everything she wanted to hear. Lisa was 1 day old when Joel Steinberg took her from the hospital. But he didn't take her to another family. He took her to himself, to his apartment on West 10th Street, where he lived with his partner, Hedda Nussbaum. Neither of them were Catholic. There were no adoption papers filed, no home study conducted, no background checks, no legal process whatsoever. It was completely, utterly illegal. Michelle was told her baby had gone to a loving family on the Upper East Side, one of Manhattan's wealthiest neighborhoods. She imagined her daughter growing up in a beautiful apartment with parents who adored her, attending the best schools, living the life Michelle couldn't provide. The truth? Lisa was in Greenwich Village with a man addicted to cocaine and her severely abused partner, and Michelle wouldn't know the truth for 6 years, not until it was far, far too late. Now, you might be wondering, how did Joel Steinberg get away with this? How was he even practicing law? Here's the shocking truth. Joel Steinberg was born May 25, 1941, in the Bronx. He graduated from Fordham University in 1962, then enrolled at NYU Law School in 1964. He dropped out after 1 semester, just one. He never got a law degree, never finished law school. But Steinberg found a loophole. The Vietnam War was raging, and the military needed personnel. Steinberg joined the Air Force in 1965. When he got out, New York State had a wartime exemption for bar admission. Attorneys whose studies were interrupted by military service could gain admission without taking the bar exam. Joel Steinberg had been enrolled for 1 semester, but when he applied for bar admission, he claimed he had a law degree. He lied on his application, and based on that lie, he was admitted to the New York State Bar. He wouldn't be disbarred until May 19, 1988, after Lisa was already dead. The appellate division ruled his original admission was void from the beginning. Everything he'd done as a lawyer had been done under false pretenses. But in 1981, when he met Michelle Lounders, he was still practicing, still meeting with vulnerable young women, still taking their babies, still getting away with it. Now, we need to talk about Hedda Nussbaum, because understanding her situation is absolutely key to understanding how this tragedy unfolded. Hedda Nussbaum was born August 8, 1942. She was intelligent, talented, and highly educated. She earned a bachelor's degree from Hunter College in 1964, then went on to get a master's degree in library science from Columbia University in 1971. By the time she met Joel Steinberg, she was a senior children's book editor at Random House, one of the most prestigious publishing houses in the world. She worked on well-known titles. She even authored 2 books herself. In one of those books, there's a dedication that now reads like a tragic warning. To Joel, my everyday inspiration. Hedda met Joel Steinberg at a party in the spring of 1975. By January of 1976, she'd moved in with him at his apartment on West 10th Street. She would later describe him as probably the most wonderful man she'd ever met. Charming, intelligent, successful, charismatic. Everything looked perfect from the outside. But abuse doesn't start with a punch to the face. It starts slowly, insidiously. A critical comment here, a moment of jealousy there, control disguised as concern, isolation presented as devotion. By 1977, just 1 year after moving in, the physical abuse began. It coincided with their experimentation with drugs, marijuana at first, then other substances, and then in 1980, Joel Steinberg discovered freebase cocaine. That's when everything got exponentially worse. The abuse became systematic, brutal, constant. Joel would beat Hedda with his fists, with objects, with whatever was nearby. He broke her nose multiple times, fractured her ribs, caused injuries that became infected because he wouldn't let her seek medical treatment. But the physical abuse was only part of it. The psychological control was even more insidious. Joel isolated Hedda from her friends and family. He controlled what she ate, when she slept, where she went, what she wore. He told her constantly that she was stupid, worthless, ugly, that no one else would ever want her, that she needed him, that he was the only person who would ever love her. And then he told her something else, something that sounds impossible to believe, but multiple psychiatrists would later confirm that Hedda genuinely believed it. He told her he had supernatural powers, that he could read minds, that he could heal people with his thoughts, that he was chosen, extraordinary, meant for greatness, that defying him wasn't just dangerous, it was impossible. By 1981, when baby Lisa came into their lives, Hedda was already trapped, already broken, already under Joel's complete psychological control. When Lisa arrived, Hedda poured all her love into this child. For a while, things seemed okay. There are photographs from Lisa's early years showing a smiling baby, a happy toddler playing in the park. Hedda dressed her nicely, took her to the playground, read to her. For those first couple of years, Lisa seemed like a normal, happy child. But you can't hide abuse forever. Eventually, it always shows itself. And if you're still watching, please take a second to hit that like button. It helps more people find these important stories. We need to remember cases like this so history doesn't repeat itself. Lisa was enrolled at PS 41 in Greenwich Village when she turned 5. At first, she was described by her teachers as healthy, happy, and remarkably intelligent, a bright child with a big smile and infectious curiosity, talkative, engaged, the kind of kid teachers love having in their classroom. But between 1983 and 1987, something changed. The transformation was dramatic and undeniable to anyone paying attention. The happy child disappeared. She became withdrawn, quiet, nervous. The bright smile vanished from her face. She started showing up to school with visible marks on her body, wearing dirty clothes, with patches of hair missing from her head. She smelled unwashed. Her appearance deteriorated steadily. A family lived on the same block. They had a 5-year-old daughter who would play with Lisa when she came to visit. That family watched the changes too, and they were horrified by what they saw. One visit, Lisa had scrapes on her arms and legs. The next visit, visible bruises in different stages of healing. Then a massive bruise covering her entire side, the kind you get from being hit with tremendous force. Then a chunk of hair missing from her head, not a small bald spot, but a significant section torn out at the roots. Every single time someone asked Lisa what happened, she gave the same rehearsed answer. "I was playing with my brother, we were roughhousing." But Mitchell was a baby, a toddler. How much roughhousing can a 1-year-old possibly do? The excuse made absolutely no sense, and everyone knew it. But Lisa stuck to the story every time, like she'd been trained to say it. Now here's the thing that haunts everyone who knew about Lisa's situation. The neighbors were afraid to report it. They suspected Joel Steinberg was responsible. They described him as having 2 completely different personalities, charming and articulate in public, terrifying behind closed doors. He knew a lot of people in the neighborhood. He had connections throughout Greenwich Village. He was a lawyer with influence and friends in the system. Multiple neighbors told investigators later that they feared if they reported him, if they called the police or Child Protective Services, Joel would find out who made the report. They worried he would retaliate. They believed that reporting him would only make things worse for Lisa, that she would suffer even more because of their intervention. So they said nothing. They did nothing. And Lisa kept suffering. Other neighbors did hear the fights. Daily screaming matches coming through the walls, the sound of things being thrown, the unmistakable sounds of violence, thuds, crashes, a woman crying out in pain. Some neighbors couldn't ignore it. They called the police. Multiple times, officers showed up at 14 West 10th Street. They'd knock on the door, Joel would answer, or Hedda would appear with fresh injuries on her face, a black eye, a split lip, bruises on her arms. The officers would ask what happened. Hedda would make excuses every single time. "I fell down the stairs. I walked into a tree branch while jogging in the park. Someone tried to rob me on the subway. I'm just clumsy." She wouldn't file charges. She wouldn't press charges against Joel. She insisted everything was fine, that the officers were mistaken, that there was no problem. And without her cooperation, without her willingness to testify, the police couldn't do anything. So they'd leave, file their report, and the cycle would continue. But here's what's truly devastating, what makes this case such a massive system failure. Child Protective Services received numerous reports about Lisa. Not 1 or 2 complaints, numerous reports, starting as early as 1983, when Lisa was just 2 years old. One of Hedda's colleagues at Random House called the Child Protection Hotline, expressing serious concerns about Lisa's safety. She'd seen Hedda come to work with injuries. She'd heard Joel call the office and scream at Hedda over the phone. She'd heard Hedda make excuses. She put it together and realized that if Joel was hurting Hedda, Lisa was almost certainly in danger too. Another tenant in their building called, making the same logical connection. If Hedda's being beaten regularly, what's happening to the child in that home? In 1984, 3 years before Lisa died, the Human Resources Administration, the agency responsible for child welfare in New York City, actually investigated the Steinberg household in response to reports. Their conclusion: no evidence of abuse. Case closed, file deleted. Pattern ignored. The caseworkers would knock on the door. Joel Steinberg would answer, charming, professional, articulate. "I'm an attorney," he'd say. "Do I look like someone who would hurt a child? This is clearly a misunderstanding. Some neighbor with a grudge." He'd invite them in, show them around the apartment. During those visits, everything would appear relatively clean and organized. Lisa would be dressed nicely. Joel and Hedda would be on their best behavior. The caseworkers would leave, satisfied that the report was unfounded. They'd close the case and move on. Here's what they didn't do. They never talked to Lisa alone, away from her parents, in an environment she might feel safe telling the truth. They never examined her body for injuries with Joel and Hedda present. They never asked neighbors if they'd seen or heard anything concerning. They never coordinated with the police department to see if there was a documented history of domestic violence, calls to that address. And here's the most infuriating part, what makes this case such a massive system failure. Every single report was treated as isolated. There was no centralized database to track multiple reports about the same family. No master file showing numerous people from multiple sources were calling about the Steinbergs. Each report came in, got investigated superficially, and then disappeared into the bureaucratic void. If someone had connected the dots, if someone had seen that the same family was being reported over and over again from different sources, Lisa might have been saved. But nobody connected those dots, and Lisa kept suffering. The abuse got worse as the years went on. The bruises became more frequent and more severe. The withdrawn behavior became more pronounced. The missing patches of hair became more noticeable. Teachers at PS 41 saw it, neighbors saw it, other parents saw it, and nobody stopped it. By October of 1987, Lisa was in first grade. She'd just turned 6 years old in May, and the signs of abuse were impossible to ignore for anyone who looked at her. October 20th, 1987. A student teacher named Stacy Weiss was working in Lisa's classroom. She noticed Lisa had visible facial injuries, marks that couldn't possibly be explained away as playground accidents or normal childhood roughhousing. She was deeply concerned. She reported her observations to her supervising teacher, expressing serious worry about Lisa's safety and well-being. According to testimony that would later come out during the trial, she was told to back off, to mind her own business, to be careful about making accusations against a family without absolute proof, to remember that falsely accusing parents of abuse could have serious consequences. The message was clear: don't rock the boat, don't make waves, stay in your lane. So, Stacy Weiss, despite her concerns, despite her instincts telling her something was terribly wrong, didn't push harder, didn't file an official report, didn't insist that someone investigate. 4 days later, October 24th, 1987. This should have been the moment Lisa was saved. This should have been when the system finally worked to protect this child. Joel Steinberg was driving Lisa on the New York State Thruway, heading north toward Albany for reasons that were never fully explained. At a toll barrier near Harriman, New York, a toll collector looked into the car as Steinberg pulled up to pay the toll. What she saw made her blood run cold. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, sitting in the passenger seat. She had visible facial injuries, bruises, marks that were clearly not accidental, and she was crying hysterically, not the normal fussy crying of a tired child on a long car ride, but the desperate, terrified, gut-wrenching crying of a child in danger. The kind of crying that makes you know, instinctively, that something is very wrong. The toll collector's immediate thought was that she was witnessing a kidnapping in progress. She immediately called the New York State Police. Troopers stopped Steinberg's vehicle shortly after he passed through the toll barrier. They questioned him about the child, about the visible injuries on her face, about why she was so upset and crying. Steinberg gave contradictory explanations, first one story, then when pressed, a different story. The details didn't add up. The troopers could tell something wasn't right. Their instincts were screaming that this situation was wrong. They photographed Lisa's injuries, they documented everything carefully, they filed a report. And then, and this is the part that still makes people angry when they hear about it, they let Joel Steinberg drive away with her. That was 4 weeks before Lisa died. 28 days, 1 month. If those state troopers had taken Lisa into protective custody that day, if they'd followed their instincts instead of following protocol, if they'd done more than just take pictures and file paperwork, Lisa Steinberg would be alive today. She'd be 43 years old. She might have children of her own, a career, a full life. Instead, they let her go back into the car with Joel Steinberg, and 4 weeks later, she was dead. October 30th, 1987, Lisa's last day at school. It was the day of the Halloween party at PS 41. Every child in the first grade class was excited, dressed up in costumes, laughing and playing games, eating candy, being kids. Every child except one. Lisa showed up that day with matted, dirty hair and a visible facial injury. She was the only child in her entire class without a Halloween costume. While other children ran around excitedly in their princess dresses and superhero capes, showing off their outfits and comparing candy, Lisa stood by herself along the wall, watching with a serious, almost haunted expression on her small face. Someone took a photograph that day during the party. That image would later appear in newspapers and on television broadcasts across the country. Everyone who saw it said the same thing. Lisa looked like she knew something terrible was coming, like she'd already given up hope, like she understood on some level that nobody was going to save her. That was the last day anyone at PS 41 would see Lisa Steinberg alive. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're finding this video important and informative, please share it. These stories need to be told. And if you can, leave a comment below about the importance of reporting suspected child abuse. Your engagement helps these crucial stories reach more people. November 1st, 1987. A Sunday evening at 14 West 10th Street in Greenwich Village. Joel Steinberg was high on cocaine. He'd been freebasing for hours. Hedda Nussbaum was there too, and 6-year-old Lisa was about to face the worst and final night of her short life. We know the detailed timeline because Hedda Nussbaum would later testify about it during the trial, providing hour-by-hour accounts of what transpired in that apartment. Between 4 and 7 p.m. on November 1st, an argument began, though calling it an argument seems inadequate for what actually transpired. Joel Steinberg, paranoid and aggressive from the cocaine, had forced both Lisa and Hedda to eat hot peppers, the kind that burn your mouth and throat, that make your eyes water, that cause physical pain. Then he demanded they drink several large glasses of water. Their stomachs were upset from the peppers. They felt sick. They didn't want to drink the water. But Joel got angry when they refused. Very angry. He didn't tolerate disobedience. He never had. What happened next, no one witnessed directly except Joel Steinberg himself. But the medical evidence tells the story with brutal, undeniable clarity. Somewhere in that window of time between 4 and 7 p.m., Joel Steinberg struck Lisa. This wasn't a slap across the face. This wasn't a push that made her fall. This was a blow delivered with tremendous, devastating force. the kind of force that causes a subdural hematoma, bleeding between the brain and the skull, that causes catastrophic trauma, the kind of injury that emergency room doctors typically see in victims of high-speed car crashes or people who've fallen from three-story buildings, the kind of injury that kills. Lisa collapsed unconscious. Her small body went limp. Joel picked her up, this 6-year-old girl who weighed only 43 pounds, carried her to where Hedda was sitting and handed her the child's unconscious body. And then Joel Steinberg did something that still shocks people when they hear about it, even decades later. He left. He told Hedda that Lisa was fine, that she just needed to sleep it off, that he would wake her up when he got back from dinner. And then Joel Steinberg walked out the door of the apartment to go have dinner with a friend at a restaurant. Think about that for a moment. Really let it sink in. Your 6-year-old daughter, the child you've raised since she was 1 day old, is unconscious from severe head trauma that you just inflicted, and your response is to go out to dinner, to leave for 3 hours, to not call 911, to not rush her to the nearest hospital, to go sit in a restaurant and eat a meal and have a conversation with a friend while your child's brain bleeds. Around 7 p.m., Joel returned from dinner. He walked back into the apartment. Lisa was still unconscious on the bathroom floor where Hedda had carefully laid her. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. Her skin was pale. She obviously needed emergency medical attention. And what did Joel Steinberg do when he came home and saw his daughter in this condition? He started freebasing cocaine. He and Hedda spent the next several hours getting high, while Lisa, 6-year-old Lisa, lay on the bathroom floor just feet away from them, while her brain swelled from the bleeding, while pressure built inside her skull, while her body slowly began shutting down, while she suffered alone on a cold bathroom floor, her life slipping away minute by minute. Hedda would later testify that she believed Joel had supernatural healing powers, that calling 911 without his explicit permission would be a sign of disloyalty to him, that he would fix everything when he was ready, that defying him wasn't just dangerous or difficult, it was literally impossible, like asking her to fly or walk through walls or stop her own heart from beating. This is the level of psychological control Joel Steinberg had over Hedda Nussbaum after 12 years of systematic abuse. This is what prolonged domestic violence does to a human mind. It destroys your ability to think rationally, to see reality clearly, to understand that the person hurting you doesn't have magical powers, they're just a violent criminal. She watched a child dying right in front of her, and she did nothing, because she genuinely, truly believed her abuser was omnipotent. Hours passed, 6 hours, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Finally, around 6 o'clock in the morning on November 2nd, 1987, roughly 12 to 14 hours after the initial injury, Lisa stopped breathing entirely. Her chest stopped rising and falling. Hedda noticed and panicked. She tried to revive her. She performed CPR the way she'd seen it done on television. Nothing worked. Lisa was gone. Hedda told Joel they needed to call for help immediately. At first, he refused. He was annoyed, inconvenienced by the situation. He wanted to finish what he was doing. Then, finally, he relented and told Hedda she could make the call. At 6:35 a.m. on November 2nd, 1987, Hedda Nussbaum dialed 911. She told the dispatcher that Lisa had gotten sick from eating vegetables the night before, that she wasn't breathing now, that they needed help. When first responders arrived at 14 West 10th Street and saw Lisa's actual condition, the extent of her injuries, the bruises at different stages of healing, the missing hair, the emaciated body, they knew immediately this had absolutely nothing to do with vegetables. This was severe trauma. This was systematic abuse. This was potentially murder. They rushed Lisa to St. Vincent's Hospital, while other officers secured the apartment and began their investigation. Detective Irma Rivera arrived at 14 West 10th Street shortly after the first responders transported Lisa to the hospital. When she walked through the door of that apartment, the first thing that hit her was the overwhelming filth. This was West 10th Street in Greenwich Village, one of Manhattan's most affluent, desirable, expensive neighborhoods. Real estate in this area cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions. This was where successful professionals lived. And this apartment looked like something from a horror movie, like nobody had cleaned it in months, maybe years. No working lights anywhere in the apartment, garbage and refuse scattered across every surface. The smell was overwhelming, a nauseating mixture of rotting food, unwashed bodies, human waste, and decay. Layers of grime covered the floors and walls. Then Detective Rivera saw the makeshift enclosure in the corner, wooden bars arranged like a cage, and inside, tied to those bars with rope wound around his waist multiple times, was Mitchell, the 16-month-old boy, white blonde hair, big blue eyes, covered head to toe in filth and grime, sitting in a soiled diaper that clearly hadn't been changed in hours, drinking spoiled, curdled milk from a dirty bottle. When Mitchell saw Detective Rivera looking at him, he didn't cry the way most toddlers do when they see strangers. He smiled, a big, hopeful, heartbreaking smile, like he was desperate for attention, for kindness, for someone, anyone, to help him escape his nightmare. Detective Rivera immediately untied him. She picked him up and held him, this filthy little boy who'd been treated like an animal. Other officers took him to be examined medically and eventually returned him to his biological mother, who'd been searching for him. Then Hedda Nussbaum emerged from the back bedroom of the apartment. Every single person in that apartment, police officers, detectives, EMTs who'd stayed behind, had the same visceral, gut-level reaction when they saw Hedda. The extent of her injuries was shocking, even to veteran law enforcement officers who'd worked domestic violence cases for years. Her face looked like she'd been in multiple serious fights with professional boxers. Her nose was clearly broken, and you could tell just by looking at it that it had been fractured multiple times over the years and never properly treated or set. Her face was covered in injuries at wildly different stages of healing. Old yellow bruises fading to green, fresh purple ones, dark scars that had never healed correctly, open wounds that were infected. She had infected cuts all over her scalp. Her hair was thinning and prematurely gray, barely covering the damage underneath. She looked like an elderly woman who'd been beaten repeatedly for years. She was 45 years old. As doctors examined Hedda over the following hours and days, the full extent of the horror became crystal clear. She had 9 broken ribs that had healed improperly, a broken nose that had been fractured at least 5 separate times, a gangrenous leg so badly infected with necrotic tissue that doctors seriously discussed amputation to save her life, a fractured cheekbone, a broken jaw that never been set, cauliflower ears from repeated blows to the sides of her head, chronic infections throughout her body, severe anemia from internal bleeding, significant malnutrition. One doctor would later testify during the trial that Hedda Nussbaum was as physically damaged and destroyed as any living domestic violence victim he'd ever examined in his entire career. He said most people with injuries that severe and extensive simply don't survive. And through all of this chaos, the critically injured child being rushed to the hospital, the toddler who'd been tied up like an animal, the severely abused woman with life-threatening injuries, Joel Steinberg acted annoyed and inconvenienced. Detective Rivera asked him directly why he wasn't at the hospital with Lisa right now, why he wasn't concerned about whether his daughter would live or die, why he was just standing around his apartment instead of by her bedside. His response, delivered in an irritated tone, "I need to take a shower, I need to get my coffee, I have my morning routine." He kept talking about how he was a lawyer, name-dropping other attorneys he knew, mentioning cases he'd worked on, trying to intimidate the officers, trying to establish his authority and control the situation the way he'd controlled everything else in his life for years. But Detective Rivera wasn't intimidated. She'd seen enough. She told Steinberg she didn't care who he was, didn't care what he did for a living, didn't care who he knew. He was coming with them to the station for questioning, period. That made Joel Steinberg visibly angry. He wasn't used to being challenged. He wasn't used to being told what to do. He especially wasn't used to being challenged by a woman who refused to be intimidated by his credentials and connections. But his reign of terror was over, whether he realized it yet or not. At St. Vincent's Hospital, a trauma team of doctors worked desperately to save Lisa Steinberg's life. The subdural hematoma, the bleeding between her brain and skull, had caused massive swelling of her brain tissue. The pressure inside her skull was literally crushing her brain. They performed emergency surgery to relieve some of that pressure, drilling into her skull to drain the accumulated blood and reduce the swelling. But the damage was already catastrophic and widespread. The doctors were unanimous in their medical opinion. If Lisa had received treatment immediately after the injury, if someone had called 911 right away instead of waiting 12 hours, she would almost certainly have survived. The initial injury was severe, yes, life-threatening, absolutely, but treatable with immediate intervention. But 12 hours had passed, 12 hours of her brain bleeding and swelling without any medical care whatsoever, 12 hours of irreversible, catastrophic damage. On November 3, 1987, the day after she was brought to the hospital, neurological tests showed no brain activity. Lisa Steinberg was brain dead. The Lisa who smiled and laughed and played, the bright little girl who loved school despite everything, was already gone. Her small body was being kept alive only by machines, a respirator breathing for her, machines monitoring her failing organs. On November 4, 1987, at 4:30 in the afternoon, she was officially declared legally brain dead by the medical team. The respirator keeping her breathing was turned off the following morning, Friday, November 5th, at 8:40 a.m. Lisa Steinberg was pronounced dead. She was 6 years old. She lived for 2,301 days, and far, far too many of those days had been filled with pain, fear, terror, and suffering that no child should ever experience. By November 6th, Lisa's story was everywhere. Front page of the New York Times, the Daily News, the New York Post, the cover of Newsweek and Time magazines, lead story on every television news broadcast in the country. The case dominated the media cycle for weeks, then months. The public outrage was immediate, massive, and sustained at a level rarely seen. This wasn't supposed to happen in Greenwich Village. This wasn't supposed to happen to what appeared from the outside to be a professional middle-class family. This wasn't supposed to happen with a lawyer and a book editor, educated people with successful careers. Child abuse was supposed to be a problem in poor neighborhoods, in broken homes, in families struggling with poverty and lack of education, not in expensive brownstones in one of Manhattan's most desirable areas. But here it was, undeniable, unavoidable, photographed and documented and broadcast into living rooms across America, and the country had to confront an uncomfortable, ugly truth that many had preferred to ignore. Child abuse knows no zip code. It doesn't care about your income level or your education level or what neighborhood you live in or what you do for work. It happens behind closed doors everywhere, in penthouses and housing projects alike, in mansions and apartments, and the warning signs are always there if people choose to see them and act on them. Lisa's funeral took place on Thursday, November 12, 1987, at Rain's Funeral Home in Greenwich Village, just blocks from where she'd suffered and died. Nearly 1,000 people attended. 1,000 people showed up to mourn a little girl that most of them had never met, never spoken to, never even seen in person before seeing her photograph in the newspaper. They came because they were heartbroken, because they were angry at a system that had failed so completely, because they felt guilty, guilty for living in a society where this could happen, guilty for all the times they might have looked away from warning signs in their own neighborhoods. Because maybe, just maybe, if enough people had cared when Lisa was alive, if enough people had acted on their suspicions and concerns, she wouldn't be lying in that small white and gold casket. The casket was covered in flowers, roses in every color, white lilies, pink carnations, elaborate arrangements sent by people across the country who'd followed the case in the news and wanted to express their grief and outrage. Stuffed animals lined the entire room, teddy bears, rabbits, dolls, toys, gifts for a little girl who would never play with them, who would never grow up, who would never get the chance to be anything more than a tragic, cautionary tale. People cried openly. Strangers who'd only known Lisa through newspaper articles and television reports found themselves sobbing. Teachers from PS 41 who wished desperately they'd done more, pushed harder, made more noise about their concerns. Neighbors from West 10th Street who wished they'd called the police one more time, who wished they'd been braver. Parents who looked at their own children sleeping safely in their beds and thought with horror, that could have been mine. The former PTA president from PS 41, a woman who'd seen Lisa in the hallways, who'd noticed the changes over the years, stood at the podium to speak. Her voice cracked with emotion as she said something that echoed through the funeral home and would be quoted in newspapers for weeks afterward. We are all to blame for what happened to Lisa. This could happen anywhere now. We are all ashamed of what happened, and we should be ashamed. She was absolutely, devastatingly right. This wasn't just Joel Steinberg's crime. This was a collective failure of epic, systematic proportions. Every person who saw Lisa's injuries and said nothing because they didn't want to get involved, every caseworker who knocked on the door accepted Joel's explanations and didn't look deeper or ask harder questions. Every police officer who responded to domestic violence calls at that address and left when Hedda declined to press charges. Every teacher who noticed the dramatic changes in Lisa but didn't push harder for intervention or file formal reports. Every neighbor who heard the screaming through the walls at night and turned up the television volume to drown it out. Every single one of those people played a part in Lisa's death. Not the same part Joel Steinberg played. He was the one who struck the fatal blow, but they all contributed to creating an environment where a child could be abused for years while the entire system looked the other way. The person with perhaps the most right to be at that funeral, the person carrying the heaviest burden of grief, was Michelle Launders, Lisa's biological mother. Michelle hadn't heard a single word about her daughter since the day she handed her over to Joel Steinberg in May of 1981. She'd spent 6 years imagining her baby girl growing up happy and loved with a wonderful family on the Upper East Side, getting the life Michelle couldn't provide at 19. And now she was planning her daughter's funeral. Now she was learning that everything had been a lie from the very beginning. Can you even begin to imagine that grief? That specific, crushing combination of loss and betrayal and guilt? You make the hardest decision of your life. You give up your child, your baby, because you want her to have a better life than you can provide. You trust the doctor who referred you. You trust the lawyer who promised you everything would be perfect. You trust the system to protect your child and give her the opportunities you couldn't. And 6 years later, you find out your daughter was never legally adopted, that she was living with the lawyer who took your $500 in cash, that she was abused for years by that man, that she died from massive head trauma while adults used cocaine and did nothing to save her, that every single thing you sacrificed for, every hope you had for her future, was built on lies and illegal activity. Michelle Launders had every right to hate the entire world, to rage against everyone involved, to collapse under the weight of that impossible grief. Instead, she found strength somewhere deep inside herself. She took control of Lisa's remains. She made sure her daughter had a proper, dignified burial. She made sure Lisa's friends from school could attend and say goodbye. She made sure this child, who'd been failed and betrayed by every adult who should have protected her, would be honored and remembered in death. Lisa was buried at Gate of Heaven in Hawthorne, New York. Michelle chose that location herself, making sure it was peaceful and beautiful. Cardinal John O'Connor, the Archbishop of New York, attended the service personally. Over 1,000 people processed through the funeral home to pay their respects to a little girl they'd never known. After the funeral, people spontaneously created a memorial at 14 West 10th Street. They left flowers on the sidewalk outside the building. Candles flickered day and night. Notes written in children's handwriting. "We miss you, Lisa. We're sorry we didn't help you. Rest in peace. You deserved better." Stuffed animals piled up against the building's facade. The sidewalk became a shrine, a stark, painful reminder of what was lost and what should have been prevented. And across America, people who couldn't attend the funeral, who lived in other cities and states but had followed the case in horror, still wanted to do something, so they picked up their phones and called. In the weeks and months following Lisa's death, child protection hotlines across America were absolutely flooded with calls. People reporting suspected abuse they'd been ignoring or dismissing, checking on neighbors they were worried about, reporting concerning things they'd seen or heard, making sure other children didn't suffer the same fate Lisa had. Child protection hotline calls increased by 83% nationally in the 6 months after Lisa's death. 83%. Lisa's death had awakened something in America's collective conscious, a determination that this could never, ever happen again. On October 26, 1988, less than 1 year after Lisa's death, Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau made an announcement that sent shockwaves through New York City and ignited a firestorm of controversy. All charges against Hedda Nussbaum were being dropped, completely dropped. In exchange for her testimony against Joel Steinberg, she would receive full immunity. No jail time, no conviction, no criminal record. She would walk away legally free from any responsibility for Lisa's death. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Phone lines at the district attorney's office were jammed with angry callers for days. Letters poured in by the hundreds, then thousands. People were furious, outraged, demanding to know how this could possibly be justified. How could they let her go? She was there that night. She watched Lisa dying on the bathroom floor. She didn't call 911 for 12 hours. She's responsible too. She's an adult. She made choices. Why does she get to walk away free while a 6-year-old girl is dead? Prosecutor John McCusker held a press conference to explain the controversial decision. He faced a room full of skeptical, angry reporters and said, "Our investigation, which included extensive psychiatric evaluation by multiple independent experts, revealed that Miss Nussbaum was so physically and mentally incapacitated on the night in question that she was not criminally responsible for her actions or inactions. She was a victim of the most severe, systematic domestic violence any of us have ever encountered in our careers." That answer didn't satisfy everyone, not even close, but the prosecution's decision was based on months of careful evaluation. Multiple doctors had examined Hedda Nussbaum extensively after Lisa's death. Psychiatrists, psychologists, trauma specialists, domestic violence experts. They conducted hundreds of hours of interviews and assessments, and they all reached the same conclusion independently. Hedda was suffering from severe battered woman syndrome, combined with what some experts described as cult-like psychological conditioning. 12 years of systematic, brutal abuse, physical, emotional, psychological, and sexual, had destroyed her ability to think rationally, to act independently, to see Joel Steinberg as anything other than an all-powerful figure who controlled her entire reality. She genuinely, truly believed he had supernatural powers, that he could read her mind and the minds of everyone around him, that he could heal people with his thoughts, that he had special knowledge and abilities that made him different from other humans, that defying him was not just dangerous or difficult, it was literally, physically impossible. The prosecution faced a strategic dilemma. They needed Hedda's testimony to convict Joel Steinberg. She was the only living witness to what happened in that apartment on November 1st. Without her testimony, they had circumstantial evidence: Lisa's injuries, the timeline, Joel's behavior, but no direct witness account of who struck the fatal blow. And the prosecution genuinely believed, based on all the expert testimony and evidence, that Hedda was a victim too, not of the blow that killed Lisa, that was entirely Joel's doing, but a victim of the same man who delivered that blow, a woman who'd been psychologically destroyed and controlled over 12 years of escalating abuse. So they made the controversial decision to offer her full immunity in exchange for her testimony, and she accepted. The trial of Joel Steinberg began on October 25, 1988, at State Supreme Court in Manhattan. Judge Harold Rothwax presiding, prosecutors Peter Casolaro and John McCusker representing the people, defense attorneys Ira London and Adrian DeLuzio representing Joel Steinberg. The charges were severe: second-degree murder, first-degree manslaughter, and endangering the welfare of a child. If convicted of second-degree murder, 25 years to life in prison. If convicted of first-degree manslaughter, 8 1/3 to 25 years. But this trial was different from any criminal trial that had come before it in New York history. This trial would make history for a reason that had nothing to do with the crime itself. It was the first criminal trial ever televised gavel to gavel in New York State, an 18-month experimental program allowing cameras in the courtroom, an unprecedented look inside the American criminal justice system. The trial would eventually lead directly to the creation of Court TV in July of 1991, fundamentally changing how Americans engaged and understood criminal justice. Cameras were positioned throughout the courtroom. Live coverage aired all day, every day. Millions of Americans watched from their homes, their offices, anywhere they could find a television. They rearranged their schedules around the trial. They called in sick to work. They recorded it on VHS tapes to watch later. Suddenly, criminal trials weren't just for lawyers and jurors and court personnel anymore. They were for everyone. The public watched Joel Steinberg sit at the defense table day after day, stone-faced and defiant, showing no emotion. They watched Hedda Nussbaum walk slowly to the front of the courtroom, still visibly damaged despite reconstructive surgery. The scars, the asymmetry of her face where bones had healed incorrectly, the missing teeth, the haunted, damaged look in her eyes that no surgery could ever fix. She looked fragile, broken, like a strong wind might shatter her into pieces. She raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And then she began to speak in a quiet, halting voice. Hedda testified for 5 full days, 5 days of reliving the worst moments of her life in excruciating detail in front of cameras broadcasting to millions. 5 days of describing how Joel Steinberg had systematically destroyed her over more than a decade. 5 days that would determine whether justice would be served for Lisa. She started at the very beginning, meeting Joel at a party in the spring of 1975. How charming he was, how intelligent and articulate, how successful and confident, how he made her feel special, valued, seen, how completely in love she fell. She described moving in with him in January of 1976, how happy she was initially, how perfect everything seemed from the outside. And then she described in painful detail when and how the abuse started. 1977, just 1 year after moving in together. Small incidents at first, a push during an argument, a shove, a slap, then escalating steadily. Systematic, brutal abuse that became a regular, expected part of their life together. She described how Joel controlled every single aspect of her existence, what she ate and when she slept and for how long, where she went and who she could see, what she wore, how she styled her hair, who she talked to on the phone. He isolated her systematically from friends and family members who might have helped her escape. He told her constantly, relentlessly, that she was stupid, worthless, ugly, unlovable, that no one else would ever want her, that she was lucky he tolerated her, that she needed him to survive, that he was the only person in the world who would ever love someone as pathetic as her. And he told her something else, something that sounds impossible, something that's hard for people who haven't experienced this kind of abuse to understand or believe, but Hedda testified to it clearly, and every expert who evaluated her confirmed she genuinely believed it. Joel Steinberg had supernatural powers, supernatural abilities that made him different from normal humans, that he could read her mind and the minds of everyone around him, that he could heal people with his thoughts, that he had special knowledge and abilities that made him different from other humans, that defying him was not just dangerous or difficult, it was literally, physically impossible. The prosecution faced a strategic dilemma. They needed Hedda's testimony to convict Joel Steinberg. She was the only living witness to what happened in that apartment on November 1st. Without her testimony, they had circumstantial evidence, Lisa's injuries, the timeline, Joel's behavior, but no direct witness account of who struck the fatal blow. And the prosecution genuinely believed, based on all the expert testimony and evidence, that Hedda was a victim too, not of the blow that killed Lisa, that was entirely Joel's doing, but a victim of the same man who delivered that blow, a woman who'd been psychologically destroyed and controlled over 12 years of escalating abuse. So they made the controversial decision to offer her full immunity in exchange for her testimony, and she accepted. The trial of Joel Steinberg began on October 25, 1980. The jury deliberated for 13 days. 13 long days of reviewing thousands of pages of evidence, discussing conflicting testimony, watching video of Hedda's testimony again and again, debating what really happened in that apartment on November 1st, 1987. On January 30th, 1989, 1 year and nearly 3 months after Lisa's death, they finally reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed to absolute capacity, every seat filled, people standing in the back and along the walls, camera operators positioned and ready, court officers everywhere maintaining order. Outside, crowds gathered on the courthouse steps. Across America, millions watched their television screens, waiting. The jury filed in slowly. None of them looked at Joel Steinberg, a bad sign for the defense that experienced court watchers noticed immediately. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. The jury foreman stood and said yes. Joel Steinberg was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter. Not second-degree murder, which would have required proving he intended to kill Lisa. The jury decided the prosecution hadn't proven beyond reasonable doubt that Joel specifically intended to cause Lisa's death, but they absolutely, unanimously believed he'd caused her death through reckless conduct that showed depraved indifference to human life. That he'd struck her with brutal force, then deliberately failed to get her medical treatment, knowing she could die without it. He was also found guilty of endangering the welfare of a child. As the verdicts were read aloud in the hushed courtroom, Joel Steinberg showed absolutely no emotion, no remorse, no shock, no acknowledgement of what he'd done or what had just happened to him. He simply stood there, stone-faced and blank, as if this were happening to someone else entirely and didn't concern him at all. Judge Harold Rothwax sentenced him to the maximum penalty allowed by law, 8 1/3 to 25 years in prison. Joel Steinberg was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He would serve his time at the Downstate Correctional Facility in upstate New York, and during those years behind bars, during all that time to reflect on what he'd done, he never once admitted guilt. Never apologized to Lisa's memory or to Michelle Launders, never showed any recognition or acknowledgement that he'd destroyed multiple lives through his violence and cruelty. Joel Steinberg was released on parole on June 30, 2004, after serving just over 16 years, about 2/3 of his maximum sentence. He moved to Harlem, where he lived in a 5th-floor walk-up apartment, working as a paralegal. The irony was thick. He could never practice law again after his disbarment, but he could work helping other attorneys prepare cases. In 2007, 3 years after his release, he gave a television interview to Dateline NBC. The interviewer asked him directly about Lisa's death, about his responsibility, about whether he felt remorse. His response, delivered calmly and without emotion, "I understand the human impulse to want to assign blame when tragedies occur, but what happened to Lisa was a tragic accident. These things happen sometimes despite everyone's best efforts." A tragic accident. Those were his actual words, not "I killed a child through my violence and deliberate neglect," not "I failed to get her the medical help that would have saved her life," not "I'm sorry for what I did," not "I take responsibility." A tragic accident, as if Lisa had slipped in the bathtub or choked on a piece of food, not been beaten so severely her brain bled and then left to die for 12 hours while adults used cocaine. Joel Steinberg died on September 16, 2022, at the age of 81. He never expressed genuine remorse, never took full responsibility for Lisa's death, never gave her memory the acknowledgement and apology it deserved. But Lisa's death, as tragic and preventable as it was, wasn't entirely in vain. The case fundamentally changed America. In the immediate aftermath of the trial and conviction, New York City completely overhauled its child protective services from top to bottom. They created centralized computer databases so reports from multiple sources could be tracked, connected, and cross-referenced. No more isolated reports disappearing into separate files. They dramatically increased training for caseworkers on recognizing signs of abuse and conducting thorough investigations. They established strict protocols for interviewing children away from their parents in environments where they might feel safe telling the truth. The Lisa Law was passed in New York State, making it significantly easier for teachers, doctors, and other mandatory reporters to report suspected abuse without fear of legal liability if their suspicions turned out to be wrong. The law clarified that reporters were protected as long as they acted in good faith. Mandatory reporting laws were strengthened across the country in Lisa's name. Schools nationwide began comprehensive training programs for staff to recognize warning signs of abuse. to understand that abuse happens in every neighborhood, at every income level, in every type of family, not just in stereotypically broken homes. That a child showing up repeatedly with bruises and matted hair and missing patches of hair is not fine, no matter what excuses the parents give or how professional they seem. The case also fundamentally changed how domestic violence was understood and prosecuted in America. Battered woman syndrome became more widely recognized and accepted as a real, documentable psychological condition with observable symptoms. The connection between domestic violence and child abuse became clearer in both public understanding and legal practice. When one person in a household is being systematically hurt, children are almost always at serious risk too. And perhaps most importantly for preventing future tragedies, the case awakened ordinary citizens across the country. That 83% increase in child protection hotline calls in the months after Lisa's death, many of those calls directly prevented other tragedies. Other children were removed from dangerous situations and saved because regular people remembered Lisa Steinberg and decided they would not look away, would not make excuses, would not assume someone else would handle it. Lisa's case taught America that everyone has a responsibility, that it's not enough to suspect abuse and do nothing, that awkwardness or uncertainty or fear of being wrong is not an acceptable reason to stay silent when a child's life might be at stake. As for Hedda Nussbaum, she spent time in psychiatric facilities recovering from the severe physical and psychological trauma she'd endured. She had multiple additional surgeries to repair damage that couldn't be addressed initially. She underwent years of intensive therapy to begin processing what had happened to her and to Lisa. She eventually wrote a book about her experiences, though it was controversial and many people refused to read it. She became an advocate and public speaker for domestic violence victims, though her involvement in that community remained contentious. Some people forgave her, understanding she was a victim of extreme abuse who couldn't save Lisa. Many others never forgave her, believing she could have and should have done more to protect the child in her care. The question of Hedda's moral and practical culpability remains hotly debated to this day, more than 30 years later. Was she purely a victim who was psychologically incapable of saving Lisa? Or could and should have found a way to call for help, despite her fear and conditioning? The answer probably lies somewhere in the complicated middle. She was simultaneously a victim of Joel Steinberg's systematic abuse and someone whose inaction directly contributed to a child's death. Both things can be true at the same time. Michelle Launders, Lisa's biological mother, lived the rest of her life carrying the impossible weight of that decision she made at 19. She'd given up her baby believing with her whole heart that she was giving her daughter a better life, more opportunities, a stable home with two parents who wanted her. Instead, through no fault of her own, she'd unknowingly handed her infant daughter to a violent criminal who would torture and eventually kill her. But Michelle wasn't to blame. The doctor who referred her to Steinberg without properly vetting him was doing his due diligence. The lawyer who took her money was operating completely illegally. The system that was supposed to protect adopted children failed at every level. The responsibility for Lisa's death lies with Joel Steinberg, who struck her and left her to die, and with a system that ignored dozens of warning signs over multiple years. Lisa Steinberg would be 43 years old today if she'd lived. She'd be a full-grown woman. She might have children of her own by now, maybe even a 6-year-old daughter. She might have had a career doing something she loved, dreams fulfilled, goals achieved, a life fully lived with all its normal joys and sorrows and complications. Instead, she died at 6 years old on a cold bathroom floor while adults who should have protected her used drugs and ignored her suffering for 12 hours. She never got to turn 7, never got to lose her first tooth, or learn to ride a bike, or make a best friend, or fall in love, or do any of the thousands of things that make up a human life. Her story is a permanent reminder that child abuse hides in plain sight every single day, that warning signs are only useful if people actually act on them, that every single adult in society has a responsibility to protect children, not just their own biological children, but all children. If you see something, say something. Don't assume you're wrong. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Don't worry about being embarrassed if it turns out to be nothing. Call your local child protective services. Call the police. Call the school. Call someone. Be the person who makes that call even if you're worried you might be mistaken, even if it's awkward, even if the family seems nice or successful or educated or lives in a good neighborhood. Because somewhere, right now, at this very moment, there's another Lisa, another child suffering behind a closed door in your neighborhood, while adults look away. Another kid showing up to school with bruises that don't match the explanation, with missing hair, with sad eyes and withdrawn behavior. Another neighbor hearing screaming through the walls and turning up the TV volume to drown it out. Another teacher noticing changes and being told not to make waves. Don't be the person who does nothing. Don't be the person who looks away because it's easier or more comfortable. Don't be the person who assumes everything is fine when all the evidence says it's not. Be the person who acts. Be the person who makes the call. Be the person who saves a child's life. You might be wrong. The situation might turn out to be innocent. You might feel embarrassed. But you also might be right. You might be the only person standing between a child and serious harm or death. And that possibility, that chance to save a life, is worth any amount of temporary discomfort. The signs are always there. Always. In Lisa's case, dozens of people saw them. Teachers saw her injuries and withdrawn behavior. Neighbors heard the violence through the walls. A toll collector saw her crying in the car. Child Protective Services received multiple reports. Police responded to domestic violence calls repeatedly. Every single one of those people had an opportunity to save Lisa's life. Every single one of them could have pushed harder, asked more questions, made more noise, refused to accept the excuses. And every single one of them has to live with the knowledge that they didn't do enough. Don't let that be you. Don't let yourself become one more person looking back and wishing they'd done more when it's too late. Lisa Steinberg deserved better than the 6 short years she was given. She deserved to be protected, to be loved, to be safe, to grow up healthy and happy, to become whoever she was meant to be, to live a full life. We failed her. Our system failed her. Dozens of individual people failed her. And she paid the ultimate price for those failures. But we can honor her memory by making sure it never happens again, by being vigilant, by speaking up, by refusing to look away when children are in danger. Before you go, please do 3 things. First, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hit that button right now. Second, share this video, post it on your social media, send it to people you know. These stories need to be told and remembered. And third, leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts on this case. Tell me about the importance of protecting children in your community. Your engagement helps these crucial stories reach more people who need to hear them. Rest in peace, Lisa Steinberg. Born May 14, 1981. Died November 5, 1987. You were only here for 6 years, but you changed America. You made people pay attention. You made people care. You made people act. Your death led to laws that have saved countless other children. Your story has awakened millions of people to the reality that abuse can happen anywhere, to anyone, in any neighborhood. You deserved so much better than what you got. You deserved to be protected by every adult who saw what was happening to you. You deserved a system that worked. You deserved to live. We're so sorry we failed you, but we'll remember you, we'll tell your story, and maybe, just maybe, by keeping your memory alive, by making sure people know what happened to you and why it happened, we can prevent it from happening to another child. Your life mattered, Lisa. It still matters, and it always will. To everyone watching, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. That's 1-800-799-SAFE. They're available 24/7. You don't have to live in fear. Help is available. And if you suspect a child is being abused, call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD. That's 1-800-424-2453. You can remain anonymous. You could save a life. Thank you for watching this difficult but important story. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and take care of the children in your communities. I'll see you in the next one.